This is your portable Open University. I'm in Birmingham in a place called Hatter's Hostel. Actually not a bad room, although I just went for breakfast and they were piping in some kind of radio station called Heart, I guess Heart FM, which was non-stop commercials and awful. This kind of, I suppose it's James Bluntish pop music, which is terribly calculated and sort of well produced and well sung, but utterly soulless and heartless. I wanted to just give a little recap of events, and I'm reading this book by a book of short stories by someone called Sonala Ibrahim, who's an Egyptian novelist in a sort of modernist style, influenced by Hemingway and people like that, but slightly experimental. And he just gives kind of a chain of events narrative. Just one thing happens after another in a very flat way, and yet you get this kind of accumulative picture of someone's life. It's sort of autobiographical. The first story, which is called The Smell of It, is sort of autobiographical, about being released from prison for political reasons. He actually refused a prize from the Egyptian government in 2003 and made a vituperative speech. He went to the prize ceremony as if he was going to accept the prize, and then actually just slagged off the government who were sponsoring the prize and said that they weren't competent to judge literature, probably quite rightly. He's still alive. He's 80 this year, and very interesting. I found it in a thrift shop in Notting Hill Gate. This is one of the delights of being back in the West, is that I can find Western paperbacks, but this is of course not Western. It's in the interesting Heinemann African Writers series, which this particular one is published 1971. I wonder how many copies they sold of each of these. They have a huge list of non-Western authors. African Writers series starts with Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart, number 1, and goes up to number 100, which is also Chinua Achebe, Girls at War and Other Stories. And the only one of these I think I'd read before was The Voice by Gabriel Okara, which is in here as well. And of course, My Life in the Bush of Ghosts appeared in this series, the original novel, which Byrne and Eno ripped off the title of for their collaboration. So anyway, I was going to take the narrative model of this, and I'd give you a narrative model of my last week or so. So I left Japan on Thursday, and had one of those elastic days where the sun follows the plane and you're in the air for 10 hours. I neglected to book my seat on the plane, so you have like 24 hours with Finnair before the flight to actually check in online, and then you can choose a seat, but I forgot to do that. So I was put in the worst seat, next to an extremely corpulent lady who was sort of overspilling the bounds of her seat. It was right in the centre aisle, and it wasn't an aisle seat or obviously a window seat, and it had like stereo screaming children as well. So 10 hours of just sitting, and also the people in front of me were recliners. I always seem to have the only really dedicated recliners who make it a sort of life's goal to actually recline their seats as far as possible into your space. So I could hardly see my telescreen in front of me, and I just gritted my teeth and sat there for 10 hours. I did watch this animation film, Your Name, which is the biggest box office Japanese film of 2016. A very touching animation. I always watch films without headphones. I just read the subtitles, and I read them almost like visual novels when I'm on a plane, partly because I don't like putting the volume up into my ears with all that ambient sound behind, but also because I don't want to be, this is very Calvinist and Scottish of me, I don't want to be dragged into, and very Brechtian as well, don't want to be dragged into the emotional narrative too much. So, and yet, it actually had some powerful kicks. It has this theme of finding your other half, which is what, of course, Plato said we were all trying to do. We're all half creatures trying to reunite with somebody we're eternally searching for. So it's about one person who's split into a male half and a female half, and a comet which is going to destroy a village. in Japan, or a town rather, whole town, smashing into the town during one of its Shinto festivities. Very Shinto film, actually, very interestingly. Shinto in that Miyazaki way, that it's sort of neo-Shinto. So the magic elements of the film were kind of vaguely folk religion-esque, animistic, and but it packed a powerful emotional punch. And just the very last line, okay, the two characters, they've been aware of each other's presence, and somehow one of them's trying to communicate from the future to the other to save her village, which she tries to do despite having a corrupt father who's part of the political machinery of the pork barrel schemes and kind of corruption in the town. She manages to mobilize the population, spoiler alert, to mobilize the population to get out of the reach of the comet just in time. But then, so in Tokyo, at the very end, they pass, they sort of glimpse each other on trains, and then they pass on the street, and they're climbing a staircase, and then they say, "Don't I know you? Your name." And just that, the last line is "your name," and that has this amazing punch. Like, wow, in this really casual encounter, these people would know each other. So I'm a sucker for these sort of sentiments. It was the only gentle, sentimental film on the whole menu of films on the Seatback Entertainment. All the rest was sort of Iron Man fascist kind of epics or swords and sorcery, and so I really worry about the West. So okay, let's get to my experience of Britain. Well, first of all, I got to Helsinki and really just basically walked from the train station to the ferry station and took the boat to Tallinn, which is what I do pretty regularly. I fly to Britain with Ryanair from Tallinn, which is only an hour or so. Well, actually, it's 3 hours on. I took the very slow ferry, 3 hours on the ferry from Helsinki. Usually, it's just one on the fast ferry. And Tallinn also, you can walk to the airport, which I really like. I'm not quite as fanatical as Will Self, who apparently will walk to Heathrow from central London, just to give his body the impression before he flies that he's actually done some travelling, because he thinks it's very bad for your body not to know that. I try to do that in limited ways, and Tallinn's a nice, small, compact town with very fresh air. You know, you can sense all the pine forests of Estonia around you. It's a beautiful old town, actually, and you can walk to the airport from the centre of town. So I did that on Friday morning, flew into London, took the... and actually Ryanair was much better than Finnair in terms of, I had a seat with a window, there was nobody sitting next to me, nice views, beautiful weather, great flight. Came into Stansted, and then on the Stansted train into the centre of London, there was this Japanese couple, and sitting next to me from Osaka, and I could sort of understand what they were saying. They were saying, "Oh, look at the apartment buildings, they're so high." It was obviously their first experience of London, and they said, they were joking about one of the stations looking like Higashi Kishiwada, which is this station in Osaka, which I know quite well. So I was going to say, as we got up at Liverpool Street Station, I was going to say, "Shuten desu, Higashi Kishiwada," you know, in the sort of voice of a Japanese train driver, "Terminus Higashi Kishiwada." That would have freaked them out. They were a very young couple, looked like they were on their honeymoon or something. But I didn't. I just sort of hatchet-faced like the rest of the crowd. Went into London. Remembered that I had a bicycle stolen once in Liverpool Street. I mean, that part of London is kind of one of my stomping grounds, because I used to live near the Barbican. So I booked a hotel in Paddington just because I had to get next to Birmingham, and I thought that would be, some of the trains went from Paddington, but also because I wanted to see the new Design Museum, so that's what I did. And that part of Kensington, wow, it's so strange, especially now with blossom coming out, so there's this kind of sense of fertility and vegetation, but also there's just the white houses, which look a bit like... the Oliver, the musical, or that thing that Brett Anderson said when he got successful in Suede, that it was a bit like waking up in a big white house. Because I think his girlfriend at the time, Justine Frischmann, lived in Kensington in one of those big white houses. And so I was walking around, went to the Design Museum, and it just felt familiar and yet utterly strange at the same time. Everybody in that part of West London is kind of like a bozo tourist with a mesh cap, one of these plastic mesh caps, and sort of skinny jeans and some souvenir T-shirt. There's just endless tacky souvenir shops around Paddington, endless tacky hotels. The new design centre was good. I had fond memories of coming down to London in 1982 and going to the Commonwealth Institute with the happy family and really enjoying it and telling Ivo, the 4AD boss, how we'd really loved the Commonwealth Institute with its stuffed penguins and just the sense of space. There was a sort of central atrium and these little staircases coming down to it, and then these weird kind of exhibits about the British Commonwealth. Now that building has been converted into the new design museum. So, I don't know, I had a certain sense of the quisling collusion of design with turbo-capitalism or something. There's a weird kind of clash of values going on in Britain now that you see Union Jacks everywhere now, and that sense you also see in London as you come into Liverpool Street, for instance. You see a lot of these very high gloss co-working spaces, creative spaces. You do see that kind of little funnels of that cosmopolitan European style. Creative Britain, but you also see this kind of very atavistic thing, which is the new Brexit Britain being born. And here in Birmingham I saw it particularly strongly, because as soon as I got off the train, arrived from London here, the whole city centre was kind of full of this energy of, hordes of people singing these football songs or fascist songs, I wasn't sure which, police everywhere, major parts of the city cordoned off and sort of unpassable, really, because there were all these barriers, a lot of construction work. And apparently there was an EDF demonstration against mosque building or something like that. So there were fascists, there were actual British nationalist fascists, the English Defence Force, EDF, in a clash against some kind of Muslim event. And there was also the local team in some football things, so the city centre was full of A, football fans, and B, fascists. So really an uneasy feeling. And I went to the City Museum just to escape that a little bit, and that was full of kind of ordinary English people with their English chatter. But also there was a little bookcase in the corner of the cafe where there was a copy, a John Calder edition of Tropic of Cancer by Henry Miller. So I sat there reading that, and there I felt at home. I felt at home with Henry Miller's voice, his description of life in Paris and sex and stuff like that. So then I basically just went to the gig and prepared. Actually, the Flat Pack festival in this place Centrala was very beautiful, in a warehousey area. I got very confused in Birmingham. I hadn't preloaded my maps on Google Maps, and I got lost in the jewellery district. I was trying to find Wi-Fi to load a map, open Wi-Fi. I don't have a SIM in my phone, and I couldn't get it, so I was just wandering lost, which is actually quite a good way to encounter a city in a non-linear way, and so I thought, where is the city? There isn't even a cafe here. There were just these endless red brick warehouses leading up the hill, and then lots of jewellery shops at the top, but you couldn't even, the cafe, the only cafe I could find was closing Saturday afternoon about 2:00, It didn't really make sense to me as a city. It just looked like some economic blight had happened. There was nothing there. And then suddenly I was in this Polish area where everybody was Polish. And there were all these kind of, guys on the street drinking, and funny restaurants with carpets everywhere, and then even Centrala, the venue doubles as a Polish people's expats club. So this is again, that I'm on the side of the cosmopolitan Britain, which is disappearing, potentially disappearing, or at least in a problematical state. So I met up with Matthew, who was the support act and who'd been largely instrumental in setting up the gig. We got a fairly good crowd. I thought maybe nobody would come, but actually it was a very extremely warm crowd. So when I performed these songs, I did a sort of Brexit protest set, so a lot of material from the new album Scorbelotchas. And I had to read. I hadn't really memorized the lyrics, so I had to read them off an iPad, which rather stunted my physical theatre, possibly to the good. Perhaps it's more effective if there's less. And I did my Bowie cover, the latest Bowie cover, Blackout, and the whole thing went down terribly well. The audience was very, very warm, I have to say, surprisingly so. In fact, after doing The Animal That Desires, which is about being the only sexual creature in the world, I sort of said, this went down suspiciously well. You guys are obviously all perverts. But yeah, some lovely comments on Twitter this morning. And heading off to London, back to London, as soon as possible. I mean, Birmingham's interesting. It's funny, they were talking, Matthew was talking yesterday about getting a star on the pavement for Lawrence, who's, for me, the most famous person from Birmingham I can think of, and yet who doesn't have his own star on the Walk of Fame on the sidewalk, wherever it is. It's just all footballers and things at the moment. So, yeah, it's a city I really don't know. I think this was actually, last night was actually my first gig in Birmingham ever. So it's, you know, better late than never. And I'm playing in London on Monday and in Bristol on Tuesday. Bristol I did play just a couple of years back, actually. Bristol always is fun because it's a kind of left-wing town. I kind of like the feeling of Bristol. And that's really, you know, an account of my last few days. It's this whirlwind thing. I'm kind of looking forward to being in Berlin, which is, you know, my spiritual homeland. And I kind of wanted to take the opportunity to show off the deliciously croaky, sexy voice I always have the day after a performance, because you really clean out your chest and kind of get a sexy voice after doing a show. So, yeah, this is your lecturer signing off, and see you at the next gigs if you can make them. I should go into the wardrobe, climb into the wardrobe, in a kind of sad tribute. Oh, you probably can't see the wardrobe. Okay, I'll disappear. Stage left.
Open University.